Thanks for tuning in with us at Dream City Church Omaha. For further information, including past sermons, visit us online at dreamcityomaha.church. We hope you enjoy the message and that it has a positive impact on your life.
So, growing up in rural America, in rural Illinois, my hometown was smaller than the first apartment complex I lived in when I came to Nebraska. My hometown, the population of our town was 300 people. And the closest city to us was 15 minutes away, and it was a population of 4,000 people. And so we didn't do a whole lot for fun whenever it came to what you would say arts and entertainment. So I am, by nature, an outdoorsman. I love being outside. I did not want video games and dolls and all the things that some of the kids growing up today are into. I wanted mud, and I wanted a fishing pole, and I wanted to sit on a creek bank, and that's how I grew up. And one of the things I fell in love with growing up with was just nature and trees. And I always loved trees. They were amazing to me. They were incredible to look at the different varieties and the produce and the product. And the creativity of God blew my mind as a kid. We lived on an orchard for a season of our life, and we had cherry trees and apple trees and pear trees and plum trees and anything you could think of. And we would go out and we would pick the fruit off the tree, and it would blow my mind just how amazing God was. And as I was thinking about the message I was going to preach today, I want to let you know, every time I come to the pulpit, I believe that God gives me a word. Sometimes you have to work a little harder with God to get that word, but in 20 years of doing ministry, there's only been one other time that I believe God placed a word in my spirit like he has this morning. Only once. And I believe this is a now word in now season for somebody in this room today. And the proof of that is I've really had to fight the enemy to deliver this to you and bring this to you this morning. 2 weeks ago, I found myself in the hospital with a tube down through my nose, my throat into my stomach, and I had to be rushed to ER, and they put me in the hospital for nearly a week, and then I had to go back to the hospital on Tuesday night. And I was in ER, and at the beginning, they're talking about admitting me, and I'm like, you can't admit me. I got something to do this weekend. I got somewhere to be this weekend. Sometimes you got to put the devil back in his place. And so today, the message I want to give you this morning is your power is in your process, not your product. A lot of the time, we look over at the product, and we think that God's called me to do this, but can I tell you, it's in here in this process where the power of your life is found. This is what you get a taste in the end. But this process is what knocks most people out. Most people quit in the process and they never get a taste the produce. And so today, I want you to understand your power is in your process. See, the last staff I was on in Illinois, my pastor, he had a different standard for me than he had for the rest of the staff, and it would drive me crazy. He would call me on the carpet for things that everybody on the staff would be allowed to do, and he didn't allow me to do. And he would say, this isn't excellence, and you need to go back and redo this. And he would call me out in front of people, and it would upset me. And one day I got super frustrated with him, and I said, why don't you treat me like everyone else? And he said, because you're not called to be like everyone else. He said, I see where you're going, and I see what I need to put in you to help you get there. And it was a process. And he would always say the same dumb sentence to me, it seemed at the time. He would say, you got to learn to be the tree. I was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like, what does it mean to be a tree? And then he read this passage to me, and this is going to be our text this morning. Psalm chapter 1, it says this, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. And he meditates on it day and night. And this is our passage right here, verse 3. He shall be like a tree planted by the river's water that brings forth fruit in its season. Somebody say, in its season. Whose leaf does not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. That word prosper has nothing to do with finances. That means you will be successful in what God has called you to do. You will be successful in your purpose of what God designed and created you to do. The ungodly are not so, but they are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore, the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor the sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows, say the Lord knows, the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. An immature Christian is a dangerous weapon in the hand of Satan. See, I said this last week, and I'll say this every week I'm given the opportunity, but greater is what's happening in you than what's happening to you this morning. We've got to allow God to allow him to show us the process. The process. So this morning I want you to join with me as we venture through the Bible, and we're in a series right now called Growing Pains, and Pastor John did an amazing job last week of kicking this series off and teaching us last week. Growing is painful, right? And so this week we're gonna look at a journey of a gentleman by the name of Joseph, and Pastor John has preached about him before. He's told us his story before. I love the way that he reads the Bible, and he brings movies and media into the way that he thinks, and comic stories, and all of a sudden the disciples have become the mafia, right? And it's like, what the world? And I'm the opposite of that. Like, I'm the total nerd who I go down this rabbit trail, and I get into Greek and Hebrew and history, and that's how my brain works. And so this morning I want you to just walk with me for a little bit. As we go down a journey and we look at Joseph, or as Pastor John would call him, Joe, we're going to look at him from a different angle, different perspective. We're going to look at the fact that God gave him a promise, but he would have never got there if he would have quit in the process. And his life is a lot like yours. You know, I told my wife, we went to Fish Fest yesterday, or Mud Fest, whatever you want to call it, yesterday. And we were down there yesterday, and I was looking around, and all of a sudden I find myself, and I'm tearing up, and I'm getting choked up, and I'm not an emotional guy. And I was like, what's happening to me? And as the guy's singing on stage, God just starts speaking to my heart, and he said, all these people are on a journey. And he said, they're all at different places, they're all at different positions on the path, but they're all on a journey. And I look down, and there's this young man, and he has an ankle bracelet from the law on his ankle, and he's worshiping God. Next to him is this old saint whose skin tells a story of a life that has been lived. And then you see next to him some kid that's dancing to hip-hop, Christian artist. And I was like, they're on a journey. Thank God for the journey. Thank God that he allows us to be on a journey with him. And can I tell you, age has nothing to do with the journey. In 40 years, I promise you, my journey's looked a whole lot different than some people twice my age. In 40 years, I've got to witness my mom. She was killed when I was 6 months old. In 40 years, I've lived as a homeless man. In 40 years, I've been neglected by family and friends. In 40 years, I've nearly died due to an illness a few times. It's a journey. You're not on a drag race this morning. You're on a journey. And the journey is the process that gets you to where God promised you he would take you to be. You see, Joseph's story, he realizes it's a journey. He realizes 6 things that we're going to go over quickly this morning. Number 1, the process of God starts with the promise, and it's often painful. And if you endure the pain, then you have to have some perseverance, which leads to patience, which will give you a new perspective. But eventually you'll reach the produce. See, it starts with a promise. A promise is a seed. A seed is a dream that God puts inside of you. And time has a way of taking the seed out of you. But you got to guard the seed with everything in you and around you. Everything starts with a seed. Science lesson. If you don't know how you got here, your mom and dad, it started with a seed. Everything that's living starts with a seed. A seed. See, Joseph, he's minding his own business. He comes from like Jerry Springer on steroids family. His brothers are whack, man. They create this plan to kill Joseph because dad likes Joseph more. Now, I come from a big family. There's 5 of us, right? And I have 4 sisters and myself. And there's times where I disliked my sisters, right? Because I'm the youngest. And if you can imagine being the only boy and the youngest boy and having 4 sisters, right? Like 4 sisters, they was dressing me up. They was making me eat stuff. I'm like, there was times I disliked, but never ever did I think like, man, how could I kill these girls, right? Like, never entered my mind. And so growing through this, as a kid growing up, I look back on Joseph's story, and I look back on his life and his brothers. He's coming out to meet them, and they develop this plan. We're going to kill this kid. And then they start arguing, and one of the brothers, I think Joseph's bringing him a sandwich because his brother's name's Reuben or something. And so he shows up, and his brother's like, maybe we shouldn't kill him. That's probably not a good idea. God might not like that. And so he has the idea, let's throw him down in a well. And so they throw him down in this well. And his thought is the brothers will go off and eat their sandwiches. He'll come back and rescue little Joe and take him back to Dad. Well, he comes back to the well, and Joe's gone. And he says, man, what happened to Joe? And they said, oh, well, there's some Ishmaelite guys that passed by here, some gypsies that passed by a while ago, and rather than killing the dude, we decided to sell him to the Ishmaelites. And he said, well, what are we going to do now? How are we going to tell Dad that his favorite son has been sold into slavery? And they said, bro, take it easy, we're not. Here's his coat. And they kill an animal, and they, like I said, a messed up family. They dip. And y'all know, like, you might be out there with your halo cricket on your horns this morning, but y'all come from some messed up families, right? Like, we all have that messed up person in our family where you're like, yeah, this is my brother, I don't know who that person is, right? Like, and so as they're there and they're talking and they're dialecting, they dip the coat in the blood, they take it back to the father, they convince the dad that the brother's been killed by an animal. Crushes him. And they don't tell him any different, right? And so the dad goes through this. Well, Joseph, we forget his side of the story a lot. And his side of the story is like this. He's minding his own business. He's doing what his dad said to do. He's checking on his brothers. And God gives him a dream. Has God ever given you a dream that you was like, yeah, I'm not so much into that right now, God, right? So in 1998, God called me to the city of Omaha, Nebraska. Brand new Christian. I'd been saved like 3 months. And I had a dream, and like I told you, I'm from a community of 300 people. It's not a very cultured community. I had no idea even where Omaha was at. I had never been here. I had a dream. I was downtown. I was doing street ministry. I was feeding some homeless people. I started praying over them. And as I was praying over them, God said, I'm calling you to do a work in Omaha, Nebraska. And I was like, God, where's Omaha, Nebraska? And so he shows me this detailed dream. And so my stepmom, she smoked a lot of weed when we were growing up, right? And so I'm sharing this to say this. So like to the point where we would be doing Bible study and she would be smoking weed while we're doing Bible study. She was giving us the revelation of God, right? And you're like, I don't think that's from God. And so the night I had the dream to come here, the next morning I get up and I'm eating my cornflakes at our breakfast table, and my mom, she comes out of her room and she's got this look on her face, and she said, I had a dream about you last night. And she's new to Christ too, and she told me verbatim details of what I had dreamed. And I was like, she smoked something incredible last night. And I watched God deliver this woman, and I watched her chase Jesus. In fact, God used that woman, and the reason I stand here today is partially, in large part, because of what God did in that woman's life. You can complain about the situation around you, or you can grow where he planted you. And so Joseph's story, he gets this dream, and God says, your brothers and your father and your mother, they're going to bow down before you, and you're going to be a leader over them. And he's all excited, and he goes and he tells his brothers, and they're like, not so much. And in fact, the Bible says his father rebukes him. He corrects him. And then he's going to feed his brothers some sandwiches. And he shows up in the field. And his brothers start lowering him into a well. And I can think like it was probably a lot like this. He's looking out of the well and all he sees is stars. And he's probably thinking in his mind something like, God, this is not what you showed me. You said they would bow before me, but you're lowering me into the ground below them. God, why am I being buried? And God was saying, son, you're not being buried, you're being planted. Because any seed has to be planted to grow. It has to be put beneath something. And a lot of the times we want the produce. We're like, God, I'm all about leading people. God, I'm all about the fruit, God. And God said, but are you willing to be planted? Guys, listen. This is why the church in America is in trouble, because nobody wants to stay planted. We need to be planted. My pastor, he told me, he said, if you ever see a tree just uproot itself and take off, that's a freaky thing. He said, avoid that. Trees stay planted. They produce where they're planted. And so Joseph, he has the dream and he's thanking God, this isn't what you showed me. And I remember when we came here in 2014, we came with fire in ourselves, and we was going to take the city, and it was nothing like God showed us. God said, you're going to go build combines for the first 6 months you're here. And I remember I would go outside on break, and I would weep, and I was doing nothing in ministry. I was going and ministering to the homeless like he had showed me downtown. And I said, God, I'm not getting anywhere. God, there's nothing moving forward. And he said, stay planted. And he planted us in this church. And we started teaching a class on Wednesday nights. Just being faithful over the seed, the dream. And so God gives the dream, and some things we can learn about the promises. The seed you sow today is the tree you grow tomorrow. And there's a lot of times we blame stuff on the devil. Can I just help you with your theology? And we start reaping all of this bad fruit, and we're like, well, the devil, and the devil's over there like, I didn't do anything. As my dad would say, and this is good hillbilly theology, if you sow a stupid seed, you grow a stupid tree, right? And he would teach me that growing up. He would be like, what you're eating today is what you sowed all the way back here, right? And so you got to be careful what you sow, because what you sow is what you grow. You got to guard the promise. See, and you got to realize that the process, step number 2, is painful. It's painful. What happens? What do you do when your dream turns into a nightmare and you want out of it with everything that's in you, but you can't escape because it's so deeply deposited inside of you? No matter where you run, your dream chases you. It's painful. It's painful. Like I said 2 weeks ago, I'm laying in the hospital with a tube down my throat. And I'm laying there, and I remember I was talking to God, and we were conversing, and I'm like, God, why am I here? And he took me back. And whenever I first got saved, I said, God, one of the things I want to do is I want to be able to teach people on healing and how healing works. He said, really? Are you willing to endure the seed? Are you willing to go through the process? Because you don't have power over anything that you have not been through yourself. You can give advice, but you can't give wisdom on something you haven't been through yourself. If you want to know real estate, you talk to somebody that does real estate. If you want to know construction, you talk to somebody that does construction. If you want to know how to have a healthy marriage, don't go to the person that doesn't have a healthy marriage. Go to the person that has a healthy marriage. If you want to know how your kids serve God all through their lives, you go to people who have seen their kids do that, and you say, what did you do, right? Seed. Guard it. And so he showed me, and I don't believe God puts sickness on anybody. Hear me. But I believe no matter what the enemy tries to take you out with, God can use that for your good. And so I spent that week in the hospital ministering to nurses who would come in, and they would make for sure that I had what I needed, and I would be able to talk to them and pray with them and share with them my story and how faithful God was. See, it's painful. I can tell you this morning, you're not being buried, you're being planted for a reason. And sometimes we lose sight of that because the season of pain is very dry often. I remember 2014, I'm sitting at my desk, and I was like, all right, God, I need a word for this year. And I'm sitting at my desk in our 900 square foot apartment up the street. And my kids are crying every day. They didn't like Omaha. They wanted to go back to Illinois. We're new here. We're country people. And this city stuff was all brand new to us. And I remember I said, I need a word. And the word God gives me, he leads me in the scripture to where he parts the Red Sea. And he says, this is going to be the driest season of your life. And I'm like, shut your mouth. And I remember I'm like, that's not encouraging. And so as I start reading about the Israelites and they're crossing the dry sea, the Red Sea, and God said, I had to dry. He said, the miracle wasn't parting the sea. He said, the miracle was I had to dry the ground beneath their feet so they wouldn't get stuck in where they were going. And he said, I'm drying some stuff out around you. And I was like, all right, God, I'm getting the point. Painful. Once you get past the painful stage, you got to realize that you have to have some perseverance. This is the watering stage. This is the stage where there's a little bit of water. And I didn't really understand what this looked like, but what it looked like was this. Joseph goes from a well, he goes from a pit to he's sold into Potiphar's house as a slave. His upgrade is from a well to slavery. See, and can I tell you, whenever it comes to the dream, when it comes to the stage of perseverance, you're going to want to quit. And you can look at me and say, I never want to quit. The reality is this, you're lying if you don't want to quit, because everybody in one time in your life will want to quit on this journey. Even Jesus wanted to quit. He went to the Father and said, I know the process and I know where it's leading. He said, but I really don't want to go through this if I don't have to. He eventually says, not my will, but yours be done. But he was, God, if there's another way, everybody wants to quit. See, Satan wants to knock the seed out of you. In 2004, God gave me 2 words. And I keep them in the front of every single journal that I own. I have a stack of these things. And in the front, if you go to any of my journals, there's these 2 words. And I believe you have to have these words in your life as a believer if you're going to be successful as a Christian. You have to have fortitude and you have to have resilience. Fortitude is defined as strength of mind that enables a person to meet danger or bear pain or adversity with courage. Let me give you the hillbilly definition of that. It means you got to have guts and a backbone. You got to be willing to stand in the face of the enemy. He will take everything from you you're willing to give him. And you have to have resilience, which is the ability to regain your structure, your size, your shape, or your position after you have been severely compressed, bent, stretched. It's the ability to bounce back from misfortune or adjust to change. Life will bend you. Life will tear you up and turn you over. But you got to be able to come back. There's a difference between falling in the mud and laying in the mud. And to somebody this morning, God would say, get up. And so whenever I was thinking about this, I went out to supper, like I said, Tuesday night with some friends. And I was sharing part of what I was going to be preaching today with one of my friends. And Karan said, well, that's like the bamboo tree. And I was thinking, like, the way his brain works, he's super intellectual. And so I was like, I've never heard the story of the bamboo tree. And so he shared it with me. And when he shared it with me, it just illuminated, and I was like, that's it. Let me tell you the story of the bamboo tree. The bamboo tree is this. It's promise, it's painful, it's perseverance. The bamboo tree, bamboo farmers in China will do this. They will start bamboo farms. They will plant the stalk in the ground, and for 5 years, it does nothing. Nothing. You see no sprout, you see no weed, you see nothing. For 5 years, they water and they fertilize. And you know what fertilizer is? Yes, right. So that they spread manure all over it. So all of you out there that's thinking, like, you don't know what's happened to me in my life, Pastor. You don't know what happened to this tree. And so they spread manure all over this tree. They water it every day for 5 years, and they see nothing. Even people like Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder's walking by like, what you growing, dude? And he's like, bamboo. And they're like, I don't even see nothing there, right? And so the reality is, in the 6th year, when it sprouts, it will grow 90 feet in 5 weeks. It can grow up to 165 foot tall if it's not cut. Why? Because it took 5 years growing down before it ever came out. That's what God's doing. He's doing something. Noah built an ark. No, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. It's never rained here. He didn't look like a fool when it started raining. Then you move from perseverance to patience. See, we're into microwaving and God's into marinating. We want everything now. But God says you have to water it, you have to work, and then you have to wait. See, can I tell you, I come from a rural community. I understand how this works. You harvest a small portion of the year. The rest of the year, 3/4 of the year, you're working the soil. You're tilling the soil. You're watering the soil. You're making for sure things are taken care of that need to be taken care of. Because when it's harvest season, it's a short season. See, what you have to realize this morning is weeds grow fast and trees grow slow. What do you want to be? You move on from patience then, and you begin to grow. And Joseph, he moves from a slave to now he's in prison for something he didn't even do, right? He's accused by rape by his leader's wife, and he's like, I didn't even touch the girl. She took my shirt. And she's accusing me of something. And for 2 years, he's forgotten down in the cellar, in the dungeon of the prison for something he never even did. And some people would say, Pastor, you don't know what they've said about me. You don't know what they've done about me. No, but Jesus does. And when he was going to the cross, it says this, they falsely said things about him, and he said nothing. The greatest thing you can do when people's accusing you is say nothing. Stop defending yourself. Let him fight your battle. He does a far much better than we do. I believe this. I believe men are like fish. They would be a whole lot safer in life if they would learn to keep their mouth shut. But we always have to defend ourselves. Let God be your defense. And then you move from patience to perspective. One thing I've learned in 40 years of living and 20 years of ministry is perspective. I've learned that the older I get, the quieter I'm becoming. Because when I was young, I thought I knew everything. I thought I had life figured out. And I'm learning I really don't know as much as I thought I knew. I'm learning that sometimes it's best just to be quiet and listen and watch God work. Speak when he speaks. Be silent when he's silent. And listen and wait. Perspective. See, when I think of perspective, I'm reminded of a couple people in the Word. I'm reminded of Job, who Job 1 through Job 41, he spends the whole book complaining and talking to God, because if you want a story about some people that lost some stuff, go talk to Job. And I always love it whenever I'm counseling somebody and they're like, I feel like Job. And I'm like, you have no clue like what you're talking about. Job went through some stuff. He lost his house, he lost his wife, he lost his cars, his donkeys, his camels, he lost his kids. He lost it all. He had boils on his body to the fact, and he didn't have no morphine drip. He was tore up. But it's in Job 42 where perspective changes, and he looks back over his life as he's holding the fruit at the end of his life, and he says, God, you have been faithful. And you're like, what? Perspective. See, what we tend to do is we beg God for a new process, and you don't need a new process, you need a new perspective. Perspective is whenever there's a sprout and it starts to come up and you start to see something. It doesn't look like what he promised, but you're like, at least God's now doing something. Perspective. And so I tell my kids all the time, I'm like, you can whine or you can win. You can complain about what you don't have, or you can start looking at what you do have, and you can start using the resources God's put around you and in you. Because perspective changes things. And so Joseph, he finds himself in prison, and he's promoted out of prison, and now he's starting to enter into the promise. And his brothers show up, right? And they need fed. And he has every right to kill them. But it's because of perspective, he says, what you meant for bad, God has used for good in my life. He has no bitterness, no resentment, no anger. He realizes that his God is bigger than his problem because he's been willing to walk through the process. And if you're willing to do that, then you reach the produce. If you're willing to do that, then you get a taste of what God promised you. If you're willing to walk out the promise and you're willing to get God's perspective on things, then you see and you get a taste and see the goodness of the Lord. And can I tell you, this has nothing to do with you. God gives you produce so that you can share it with someone else. You grow things in your life so you can share it with someone else. I'm 0 for 2. I feel like a Cubs pitcher today. He gives you things in life not for you. Listen to me. He gives you things in life so that you can be a blessing to someone else. Because someone else is just starting the process. Someone else is just beginning. And you can look back on them and you can say, this looks like it's going to be hard and take forever, but stay faithful to the call, because if you're faithful to the call, you're going to get to the fruit. If you're faithful to the call, you're going to get to taste something that is great on the other side. Produce. Most people never reach this stage because they quit here. They quit here. See, this morning, Andre, if you're back there, you guys can go ahead and come up. This morning, as we're finishing up, I begin to think about the process. begin to think about how when you reach the stage of picking fruit, it looks easy. Because we just go to the grocery store and buy this by the bag. But this took time. Started with a seed. It was painful. It required perseverance and patience. Slowly grew into a tree. But even the tree, as it's growing, took time to get the apples. And I think, we're so quick to judge people because we walk in on the mile marker of their journey. You don't know what they've been through. Before you speak too soon, walk a mile in their shoes. Get to know them. Understand where they've walked, how they've journeyed, where they came from, what they've experienced. It would blow your mind if you knew some of the stories sitting in this room. Blow your mind. It would blow your mind if you knew some of the stories sitting on the seat right next to you. It's a process. See, there's a lot of people that come to me and they're like, Pastor Don, man, dude, I want the anointing that's on your life. And I'm like, you have no idea what you're asking. You really want to wake up and have your head laid on a toilet seat because you can't quit throwing up blood. And you're laying there since 2004 to 2018. And then you go out and you stand before people and you preach to them about how God is a healer. Because He is. You really want people to neglect and leave you and tell you you'll never do what God told you you'll do. It's a process. And your story is like my story, and my story is like Joseph's story. Job's story is like Jesus' story. Jesus' story is like all of our story. It's a journey, friends. And I've come today to tell you this morning. God cannot afford for you to quit. You've come too far in the process. He didn't bring you this far this morning to let go of you now. And don't you quit on Him because He's not quitting on you. I've come this morning to equip you, to encourage you this morning that this is not the end of your story. Listen to me. Your greatest days are ahead of you. Get up. Fight another round. This is how we're going to close this morning. I'm going to ask that you all stand to your feet and lift your hands. We're going to join together in a song. And I'm going to encourage you. He shall be like a tree planted by the river's water that brings forth fruit in due season if you do not quit. You can't quit. Sometimes you need to remind the devil, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not quitting. You can do what you want to do. I don't give up that easy. You messed with the wrong person. Every time you come at me, I'm going to go lead 5 more to Christ. Every time you come at me, I'm going to go tell somebody else how faithful He is, how good He is. You can't quit. Let's join in song together and just lift His name up this morning real quick.
This is how I fight my battle.